Excellent. I will be quick so we can get to the candidate, who I'm sure you're all excited to hear from. Once again, Doug Trum, I use he, him pronouns, executive director at the Urbanist. We're in the middle of our subscriber drive, so I'll just do a plug for that real quick. We run on reader support plus a little bit of advertising, but without readers, we would be nowhere. So please, if you're on the site, you'll get the pop-up. Consider chipping in what you can. It really mean a lot to us. And one of the services we do at the Urbanist is the endorsement process, and we're excited to have one of our endorsed candidates here tonight. She's running in the 46th, and a little bit about Darya Farivar quick before I turn over the mic for her kind of stump or whatever she wants to kind of do to introduce herself. She is the daughter of Iranian immigrants. She lives in Lake City, I believe. And she started her career working with kids with communications disorders, and also was a water polo coach. And eventually she moved over to Disability Rights Washington as policy director, and she also works with community mobilization. And that is how we kind of got to know her. We collaborate with Disability Rights Washington a lot through the Move All Seattle Sustainably Coalition, and they're great partners on statewide stuff, which is hard to get to Olympia, but they have a loud voice in Olympia, do lobbying in Olympia, and we just try to make sure that mobility justice is first and foremost when we're doing these big highway bills and other kind of investments. She cleaned up in the primary. All of her opponents endorsed her, and she's going in to the general against Lila Krave, or Rave, I'm not sure how you say that, with a lot of momentum, but certainly needs support. So we'll hear more about her and consider chipping in, whether that's volunteering or donating to keep her campaign strong. But I will pass it over to Darya for 5 minutes or so to add to that biography and kind of talk about why you're running.
Cool. Thanks, Doug. Thanks you all for coming out to listen to me. I'm excited to learn from each one of you. Also love that you brought up water polo. Nobody ever brings up the water polo part of my resume. I guess jumping straight into that, I've lived in the 46th district my entire life in the Lake City neighborhood. I have an interesting experience though, because I went to View Ridge, Eckstein, and Roosevelt in the 46, which are very different lived experiences than my neighbors here in Lake City. My family, when they fled Iran because of the revolution, they met at Roosevelt High School. It's got a very special place in my heart, and I continue to go back to help out with their water polo program. Living in Lake City is a big reason why I'm running. I love this neighborhood dearly, fiercely. It is a tight-knit community, a strong community, lower income, and I think Lake City is actually just now becoming a majority minority community as well. A lot of my neighbors are immigrants, refugees, first generation like me, and it's so wonderful to be surrounded by people with similar lived experience. The reality is that Lake City, being a wonderful neighborhood, is still struggling in a lot of ways. In Lake City, I really can't go anywhere without seeing folks who are experiencing homelessness, housing instability, behavioral health crisis, and seeing folks get pulled into the criminal legal system when they don't get the help that they need. Those are really my top priorities for this race and the intersection of those issues. And it's not just because I live in Lake City and I see folks who are struggling every single day. If you all know Lake City, the Fred Meyer here. The Fred Meyer, I can't go there without seeing folks who are struggling, and not just struggling. I have been actively watching the same folks deteriorate for years every time I go to the grocery store. And it is awful to see that and feel like our state is not doing enough, and to see the direct consequences of our policy failures and lack of action. These are the issues I'm working on in the legislature right now. I'm public policy director at Disability Rights Washington. And so I spend my days working on mostly civil rights legislation. and really focused on those intersections. I was actually hired at DRW to work on a lawsuit all about the state's failure to understand and respond to the reality that folks experiencing homelessness and behavioral health crisis in Washington are almost guaranteed to come into contact with the criminal legal system. Until we build our systems, programs, services with that understanding, right? Realizing that we are pushing people into the criminal legal system, that we are using law enforcement to plug the holes in our social services system, things are not going to get better. And I've been able to see what solid programs that make progress and support folks long-term actually look like. I'm part of a team that oversees 12 different behavioral health diversion programs across the state. They're exciting programs. They're doing this work of not waiting for folks to fall through the cracks in the system, but proactively reaching out and providing help as soon as help is needed. They're programs that are intervening before someone loses everything. They're programs that are going out to encampments to build relationship and trust. They're programs that are even starting in jails to build relationship there, so that when folks come out of that system, they go into a better situation. They don't go right back into the same crisis they came from, going through that revolving door of incarceration and institutionalization. The human cost is huge, and the cost to our taxpayers and our other state programs is also massive. We're not getting a return on investment. I know we can do better because I've been seeing it happen, right? These programs are successful, they're evidence-based. Here in King County, we've got the LINK and the LEAD programs. Those are programs that have been around for 10 years doing excellent work. We need to shift our focus from just trying to address this never-ending fire hose of folks in crisis to actually taking a step back and looking at the long-term vision, right? How are we long-term going to change what's happening and make sure folks get the help that they need so we're not constantly in this struggle? That's why I'm running. I want to get in there and work on this. And I think it's really important that as we're trying to tackle these big, huge issues, that we're listening to the folks who are the experts. And I don't mean the people sitting around behind their computer screens and looking at the data and looking at the program models. I mean the people with direct lived experience. My slogan has been from the very beginning, lifting every voice. And that's because I believe in that. And that's what my career has been about. It's been about lobbying, but it's been about how do I use my power and influence as a lobbyist to create space intentionally for folks who are experiencing this every day, who know a lot better than me or any of my colleagues what needs to happen because they are living it every single day. I've spent my career trying to change the way that the legislature operates to make sure that we can bring people in, and that it's hopefully not so much of a traumatizing process as well. You all have given testimony. You know, people are up there talking about the worst moments of their life in front of a panel of maybe 15 different legislators, and you get 2 minutes to tell your entire life story. It's just not working. We need people who are going to work to change these systems and bring in the people who have not been heard, right? And those are these underrepresented communities like folks experiencing homelessness, behavioral health crisis. And it's also communities of color. It's also communities like mine. I mentioned my family is from Iran. They came here because of the revolution. We're watching what might be the start of another revolution in Iran right now as well. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the killing of Mahsa Amini, who was killed by the Iran's morality police because she was not complying with the religious law. She was not wearing her hijab properly. These are voices that haven't been heard really across the country, but especially in Washington. In Washington, we don't have any Middle Eastern people in office. You all might remember we had Cyrus Habib, who was our lieutenant governor, who's an excellent advocate for our community, and we don't have him anymore. If I'm elected, I'll be the first Middle Eastern woman ever elected to the state legislature, and I don't take that lightly. And if I'm the first, I certainly don't want to be the last. And I know also that this burden to represent these communities should not all be on one person. It is a community effort. And so one of the things I'm working on, especially because of what's going on in Iran and my community trying to be heard right now, is establishing a commission for the Middle Eastern community amongst the cultural commissions within the governor's office. Will give us an institutional voice and make sure that regardless of who we have in office, we have access to those rooms of power, and we can make sure that, you know, these issues that we're experiencing don't end, the conversation doesn't end when the news cycle ends. So we've got a lot of work to do, and I am here for it. I'm never someone who's shied away from a challenge, and I'm hoping that I get to work with all of you on these huge problems we have up ahead of us. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you so much for that introduction. That really is a interesting route to office, and there's so many issues to work on, and definitely public safety is top of mind. But another one that sort of that's really forces itself back in the conversation every late summer and fall, it seems like, is climate and generally our air quality with the issue of forest fires. Do you have any thoughts about what the state can be doing, what you can be doing as a state rep to try to get a handle on that? I mean, it's a huge problem stemming from years of, letting the climate crisis slip, not having great forest management practices. And, there's sort of a plan out there that that Lands Commissioner Hillary Francis has sort of, put out there for several years. But, it seems like our forests are still very vulnerable to these big fires due to climate change. So what can we do?
Yeah, big question. I'm certainly not an expert, right? And so I would lean on you all to hear more about what it is that you want to see happen. But when I think about forest fires and I think about climate change, it really comes back down to transportation and density for me. Those are the issues that I know best working with DRW, and those are issues that are also very pertinent to what's happening in the 46th as well. I think, well, let's talk about transportation, right? We know that transportation is our biggest source of pollution, right? We need to get folks out of cars. We need to get folks out of, trucks. And we need to hold corporations accountable for what they've been doing to our marginalized communities. I'm really interested in building up our public transportation systems. One, because working at Disability Rights Washington, a lot of the folks that I work with, a lot of the advocates I work with, right, are people who rely on public transportation. They don't have another option. That is how they get around, right? And so our system has to work for folks who are relying on it, and it has to work well enough that we can encourage folks to get out of their cars, because people aren't going to stop driving until public transportation is more convenient than getting in their car to go to where they need to go, right? In the 46, we've got some great opportunities. We've got some brand new light rail stations. We've got one more that's going to be up at around 130th as well. We've got a great opportunity to connect folks to this resource to get people around the different city in the I-5 corridor. And we need to invest more in that. Part of that conversation, and part, I think, that is part of that conversation has to be pedestrian safety infrastructure. And that's a conversation that I think that's happening more now, which is exciting. Anywhere you walk around in Seattle, you see the lack of infrastructure, and you see just horrific sidewalks, for example. I living in Lake City, we don't have sidewalks in most places. It's getting better, actually. Just a couple of weeks ago, there were folks working on curb cuts and sidewalks just a block or two away from me, which is fabulous, but it's taken this long, right? Lake City is one of the last stops, communities to get these sidewalks. And so we need to make sure that those are in place so people feel comfortable getting from A to B to C, right? So that folks are able to walk safely, roll safely, however it is they get to their different locations, they can do that safely in a way that they don't have to navigate in the middle of the street, for example. Disability Rights Washington worked on the Don't Block the Box initiative, but even beyond Don't Block the Box, and that's I think you all know this, but the blocking the crosswalks, right? Beyond that, we're sending people into the streets because we don't have curb cuts where they need to be, right? There are big roots protruding out of the sidewalks. It's really dangerous to get around. I myself, when I'm doorbelling, I'm pretty much just focused on where I'm walking because I know I am going to fall and trip on something, some crack. And part of what's happening there is that it's actually the homeowner's responsibility to fix their sidewalk, right? Which is not equitable. There's a lot of homeowners that are barely scraping by, being able to stay in their homes. A lot of folks who are aging in place who, physically can't get out there and maintain it, or financially they're having to deal with these enormous property taxes. Since we don't have progressive revenue, we're funding everything through our property taxes, right? And the cost of maintaining those sidewalks is just not something that they can afford. I'm really interested in trying to figure out And this is a huge conversation. This is not something that's going to happen overnight, right? But how do we shift that back to maybe the cities, right? For them to take ownership of what's happening with those sidewalks, right? That is one piece of the transportation conversation I'm really interested in. So I think I digress a little bit, but essentially we need to be investing in our public transportation system so that we can offset or at least reduce some of the environmental degradation that's happening. Also, we have to address this urban sprawl, right? Folks can't afford to live in Seattle. Lake City was one of the last affordable, quote unquote, affordable neighborhoods in Seattle. I can barely afford to live in Lake City anymore. And so folks are leaving. They are going further and further and further out of the cities, right? And that is having serious environmental consequences. So what we can do is increase density. It's investing in things like the missing middle housing bill and making sure that we're maximizing density around public transportation to make sure that not only do folks, can they stay in the city and can they get to where they need to go quickly, right? We're encouraging folks to get out of cars because it's going to be more convenient. Light rail is going to be right there for them. Buses are going to be right there for them. Really want to make sure that as we are increasing density, we're not losing sight of affordability as well. It's going to be really, really important that, especially neighborhoods like Lake City, right? As we are seeing this development come in, just a block or 2 blocks away from me, there are some townhomes that have gone in, which is great. It's an option for I was going to say diversity, for density. But these townhomes are about $800,000 a piece. Not affordable to me, and not affordable to a lot of the folks in my community, right? How do we make sure that we're bringing in density and our density is also going to be there and help the communities that are actively being displaced from neighborhoods like City to actually stay in the communities that they have grown in where their natural supports are? So, Doug, that's probably more than you wanted, but that's what I got.
No, anytime you kind of wrap in housing and transportation in answer to Urbanist question, I think that is good and bonus points. I definitely think about climate that way too, so I appreciate that. And you know, transit is going to be a big part of it. Just not putting as much carbon out into the atmosphere is a great way to, you know, you mentioned the fire hose when it comes to dealing with kind of mental health and homelessness and all of that. We also have to think of that when we deal with climate and think about trying to, if nothing else, at least stop making the problem worse by pumping more carbon in the atmosphere. But I also appreciate the sidewalk mention. I'm curious to drill down a little bit more on sort of how you would approach say there's another state transportation package, or there's something that's supplemental that comes up and you're in office. Would you? I know that the last state package was, you know, one of the most transit and sort of multimodal heavy ones. Would you like to go beyond that? Did you think that's at a good benchmark? What do you what would you look for in a package?
What I would look for in a package is community buy-in. I want to make sure that what we're putting out there is ultimately what the community is asking for. And I don't think we got that. I mean, I think we got some good things. I don't think we got all the way there. I heard a lot of folks in the community who were talking about, and maybe this is more specific to the Climate Commitment Act, right? But that we weren't actually doing what the community has been asking for, especially like what Indigenous communities have been asking for. So to me, it's not necessarily about like what specific policies are in the budget, but how are we making sure that the communities that are going to be impacted by all of this are actually the ones driving this, and it's what they want. So I would be checking in with community. If another package like that came by, I'd be checking in with folks like the Urbanists. I'd be checking in with folks like the Disability Mobility Initiative and trying to learn about you all as experts and as people who are doing this work, right? Is this checking the boxes? Is this the direction that we need to be going in?
Yeah, that's much appreciated, and it definitely can sometimes feel like it's hard to sort of get access, get your voice heard when Olympia is hard to get to, and you know, session happens in such a condensed timeline. So I appreciate that commitment. I suppose, we're kind of circling around it, but I did want to kind of just highlight that part of why folks like Disability Rights Washington and the Urbanists are, really focused on sidewalks, on safety investments, is because we have a problem that's getting worse. The vision, the state has a Vision Zero goal of ending traffic fatalities by 2030, as does the city of Seattle and several other cities in the state. But unfortunately, traffic fatalities are going up. There's a lot of issues at play there, including heavier cars and, even oddly in the pandemic, people are driving less, but was more speeding, sort of relatedly. What do you think that the state can be doing? I know there's a lot of efforts, but what would you kind of raise up and try to amplify? I'm kind of picturing you as a transportation committee member. I don't know if you'll get that, but I know you have a lot of expertise to bring to bear on that. So I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Your question, like, what would I highlight in that, or what would I do differently? Was that
it's sort of just generally like, let's say you get to influence some, whether it's directly through policy or just being able to lean on different state agencies. What should we be doing on Vision Zero that we're not doing right now?
That's a good question. I guess where my brain goes immediately is and I don't know exactly how this happens, or if this is something that happens on the city level, but how are we deciding which communities to prioritize? That makes sense. For example, like my family lives around Sandpoint Way, and I've got a lot of friends on Sandpoint Way. I have friends who have had cars literally drive into their homes, crash into their homes, right? And there's no sidewalks on Sandpoint Way. I think there are on some pieces of Sandpoint Way, but that's farther south. That's not in the Lake City neighborhoods. That's not in the lower income neighborhoods. That's not in the communities where folks have not been heard. And so how are we making sure that that's happening equitably, those investments? Sandpoint really, really desperately needs safety infrastructure, and has for years. Like, this is not a new issue. This is just, unfortunately, the reality of living on Sandpoint Way, at least in my area on Sandpoint Way. Farther down, there are those, I don't know what they're called, but the kind of speed readers that tell you, you're driving too fast. This is a 25 zone or whatever. We don't have any of that up here. We don't have safe ways for folks to cross Lake City I've heard from a lot of folks who are biking in my community. There's no way to safely cross Lake City, or at least comfortably cross Lake City while on bike, right? And so what communities are we continuing to prioritize? And I think that a lot of that comes back down to making sure our representatives really reflect the communities that we're trying to serve. The representatives we've had for the state are not coming out of Lake City. And that needs to change if we really want to make sure that these communities are being taken care of. And so, I don't know, that's my kind of immediate thought on that.
And you already brought up housing affordability, which we really appreciate. But I know folks a lot of our urbanist readers were really invested in the House Bill 1782, the missing middle bill that Representative Jessica Bateman from Olympia led. It got closer than anything in the past has, but still died in the House. I'm curious. I know, just so folks know, in the questionnaire, Darya was one of the folks that said she would support that bill. But if there's anything you add, like what strategy you might take to sort of clearing the path for that, or what we can do if it doesn't go anywhere. 1 second. There we go. I know it's a sort of a tough question that a lot of folks have tried, and we're not quite there yet, but it does seem like there's momentum building.
Yeah.
What do you think that bill can mean, and what can be a good way to start broadening that coalition?
That's a good question. And I'll be transparent and say that I, in the legislature, have not really worked on zoning reform. And so I don't know that I'm the right person to speak on strategy. I think I'm the person that folks can lean on and say, this is what we need you to do as an ally and someone who supports this. This is what has been missing, and this is how you can be helpful in your role as, you know, representative in the 46th district, right? I think that's my role to play in this. Now, depending on the legislation, one of the strategies you can take is to ask for more than you think you're actually going to get, or more than you even want or wish for and hope for, right? And drop that and know that it's going to be messed with, right? The reality is, of whatever legislation you drop in Olympia, right, it's not going to come out the same way that you dropped it. That is a given, right? that is an absolute, right? And so figuring out, you know, is there a way to set ourselves up for asking for the absolute most, so that hopefully we get what we want at the end? I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that is a relevant strategy for this bill, because I haven't worked on it personally. The 46 is an interesting area. This is a super contentious issue in the 46th district, and we've got at least 2 historic maybe even 3 historic districts that have popped up, which I think are well intentioned, and there's a lot of beautiful old homes in the area, and I certainly have an appreciation for what folks are trying to do there. And this is an issue that a lot of folks want to know, you know, your position on it. Are you going to change the character of the neighborhood, right? What I'm getting at here is I think that this conversation has been really polarized. It feels like we have been forced into these choices that are either you have apartments or you have single family zoning, and that's it. And I don't think that that's the question. And so as I've been going out and talking to folks and learning more about where people are coming from, I'm trying to talk about what's in the middle. And that's what the missing middle bill is about, right? And so how do we kind of shift the narrative back around to, we all want the same thing. We all want everybody to have a home and have a place that is safe and comfortable for them, right? And we all need to you know, be a part of that solution, right? This is not just something for one group of people to work on, another group of people to sit back on, right? And so I'm wondering if there's a way that we can kind of reshape this conversation, knowing that there's a lot of emotions around it right now. I don't know what the answer is there, but that's one of the things that I have been trying to do out in the field, is how do we kind of take a step back and look at what it is that we both want and build from there and figure out how to get to where we need to go from there. So I don't think that was a great answer, but
It was an honest answer, which I appreciate. And I know you're probably learning a lot as you do a lot of door knocking in your district, and hearing a lot on both sides. One thing that's definitely interesting is there has been some statewide polling on this, and I feel like the public perception is that, you know, this is at best a 50-50 issue, but a lot of the statewide polling suggests there is really a lot of support for missing middle housing that sort of gets lost with some of the loudest voices, sort of just assuming that everyone in the neighborhood agrees with them.
Yeah.
So I will just throw that out there. But I know that in practice, it, you know, sometimes the loudest voices really get to set policy, because they're the ones who show up at the meetings and sort of set the tone. But there was also a question that came in from the chat that, and you know, I started with zoning capacity because that's certainly important as far as getting the ability to build housing, whether affordable, market, or otherwise. But someone asked about senior housing and how to make sure that that's affordable and quality, and you know, promoting healthy lifestyles for folks as they age. You know, I know the state has a role in providing funding, but what would you like to see on that front?
I want people to be able to age in place, and that's a big concern for the folks I've talked to in Lake City. My parents, even, that's a concern for them, right? And what I've heard a lot from folks is property tax. The property tax is unbearable, and it is pushing people out of their homes, out of their neighborhoods, right? And there's not a whole lot of relief. You know, King County has a program where seniors can apply and get some property tax relief. That program, I've talked to several people now, and that program is taking about 2 years to get back to folks. 2 years. It's a lot of property tax over 2 years. And, people don't have 2 years when they're in crisis. It needs to be immediate relief and support, right? So I wonder what we can do to support the counties and make sure that this is a process that moves faster. I wonder if there's something that we could be doing proactively to find out if folks, are eligible for this and just giving them the exemption. I think a lot of the programs and services we set up are for folks who are, struggling. And we ask them to do the legwork of coming to us and navigating the bureaucracy. It is so hard to do advocacy if you're in crisis. It's almost impossible, right? And I just think that is so backwards, and no wonder we have folks who are struggling, right? And so I wonder if there's something we can do proactively there. That's kind of the first thing that comes to mind. The other part of it is, how do we prioritize? I mean, I'm not sure if the question was asking, like about housing that's allocated specifically for seniors or just folks who are aging in neighborhoods. But, one of the things that's happening here locally in the Lake City area for who knows how long, we've been talking about a community center. For those who don't know, Lake City has a very, very small, kind of falling apart community center that is well loved and very well used, but we need some help. We need a new community center. We need a bigger community center. One of the things that's being talked about with this community center is that they're going to build about like 6 stories of housing above it. It'd be really great for that to be prioritized for folks who are going to be displaced out of the community and folks who are aging in the community, so that it's a type of resource hub that's right there, right? There are programs, there are services, there is all sorts of stuff connected to that community center. It'd be great for that to be prioritized for the folks who are going to need it the most. And so I don't think that it's earmarked for one population or another right now. They're going to be doing some community engagement work around that to see what it is the community needs, which is great. And hopefully there's some accountability around that process as well. But I want to see more opportunities for folks to have housing that's connected to a community, that's connected to a resource, that's connected to transit, right? As well. So if folks, don't want to live in a single family zone, they've got other options that aren't going to isolate them as well, and that they're not going to get displaced out of in a year or two. Yeah.
Thanks for the answer. Oh, we did just get a question in the chat, so why don't we do that? What are some legislative priorities related to disability rights that might not be on people's radar that you'd like to draw attention to?
Oh my gosh. I'm trying to figure out which one I want to talk about. An issue that I never get to talk about is voting and access to the ballot. And it's something that I am really passionate about. I've done a lot of civic engagement work, be it like candidate forums or GOTV stuff, or be it trying to actually change our laws to make sure that folks with disabilities aren't left out of the process, especially disabled incarcerated folks aren't left out of the process. One of the things that we have, I think, as a state talked about here and there, and haven't made a whole lot of progress on, but I'm really interested in working on is electronic ballot return. Now, this raises all sorts of concerns about, security from some folks. When I think that those concerns are totally valid, but I think that it's a problem that we can hopefully work around and actually solve. In Washington, we're really lucky to have mail-in voting. It becomes accessible for a lot of people because you don't have to actually go to a polling place. You can, fill out your ballot in the comfort of your own home. And it makes it very difficult for folks who don't have a permanent address to be able to access the ballot. And it also makes it really difficult for people who might have a mobility disability or a visual disability, a writing disability, a reading disability, right, to be able to access their ballot. One of the communities I've been talking to about this specifically are folks with visual disabilities and people who are blind. And in addition to having a mail-in ballot, we also have the ability to actually go online and mark your ballot online, and then at the end of that, though, you still have to print it and you have to sign it and you have to put it back in an envelope and get it to a Dropbox or mailbox. And so the intention is good behind having this online ballot marking system, but if you can't actually return your ballot online, there's still a huge amount of barriers there. And I've been talking to folks who are blind about this and how, it's really, it doesn't address it, right? And our transportation system is so fraught that it's hard to get yourself to one of the limited in-person, they're not called polling places, like accessible voting locations. I'm sorry, the word is escaping me. It's difficult to get there, right? We just finally got one at UW, just finally. That wasn't a part of our initial plan for having accessible voting locations across the county and the state, right? And so I'm really interested in working on that. This is another one of those big issues that's going to take a lot of time and a lot of organizing to get done, but I think that it's a really worthwhile one. Our vote is our voice, and that sounds cheesy, but it's really, really, really true, right? And especially as a first-generation Iranian, I feel that very, very deeply. Your vote is how you're able to change systems and speak up about what it is you do and you don't want. And when folks don't have access to that, they're not represented and their issues aren't heard in the legislature, right? It's a ripple effect. And so we have to make sure that folks with disabilities have access to the ballot. We have to make sure that incarcerated people have access to the ballot. A lot of folks don't realize this, but there are a lot of people in jail who are still eligible to vote. I have been working with the King County jails, trying to address that, trying to improve that, to make sure that A, people know that there's an election happening, and B, they know that they're still eligible to vote as long as they're still awaiting trial. And there are a lot of people who wait a very, very long time to go to trial, sometimes multiple elections that they spend in jail. These are the individuals who ultimately are going to be most impacted by the changes we're making, and so they need to have a voice in this process, and this is one of those ways to do that. So thanks for giving me a chance to talk about voting.
Yeah, and Ellie's question reminded me too that part of the reason why we love working with Disability Rights Washington and the Dismobility Initiative that Anna Zievarts is leading is we've learned a lot about sort of how folks with disabilities, or we work with folks with disabilities, look at these issues. And I was curious if you would sort of explain for folks why Disability Rights Washington prefers using disabled people or other similar terms rather than like mobility challenged and other sort of more euphemisms, because I think a lot of people, they want to do the nice thing and they don't really realize impact of language. And I know disabled folks all maybe have different takes, but why does Disability Rights Washington land that way?
Yeah. So for me, it depends on the community I'm talking to. I kind of alternate between identity first and person first language. So person first language is they are a person with autism. Identity first language is they're an autistic person. And identity first language is the language that's used by justice movements, in part because it's reclaiming that language, right? Disabled is not a bad word. Our society has taught us that being disabled is a bad thing, and thus disabled is a bad word, right? And that's not true. There is nothing wrong with being disabled, right? It is just a different lived experience. And we have to reflect that in the language we're using as well, but there's no need to avoid it. Using terms like special needs or, oh, what's another one I can't think of? Special needs is the one that was brought up today. First of all, the needs aren't special. It's just not. It's just an accommodation to help someone access something the same way that another person would, right? To say that it is special, it kind of also feeds into this idea that it's not something to help with basic access. It's like an additional, I'm like struggling to come up with another word besides special. It's an additional thing that kind of somehow gives someone a special benefit that others don't get, right? It's just to access the same thing like everybody else. And so I really encourage you all to use either people first language or identity first language. There are still a lot of folks in the community that prefer people first language. And I think that that comes from a place of trauma and other inappropriate language being used to talk about folks with disabilities. Identity first language is still very, very popular in the developmental disability community, especially. And so I try to alternate when I don't know community's preferences, but I think it's important to have those conversations and talk about these things. So thank you, Doug, for pointing that out.
I'm glad that discussion reminded me. It's a really useful thing, I think, just to think about these issues and how it affects people and how it's sort of on us to make systems that work for everyone. Another big one you hear sort of in the mobility justice and disability rights, discussion is that if we design our streets and our buildings to work for disabled people, then they will work really well for everyone, because there's a lot of people who, whether it's just because their knees are aching or, they're having to carry a lot of stuff, whether that's a stroller or whether that's just bringing in a lot of groceries or whatever, that's a more convenient building for everyone.
Exactly. But universal design.
Yeah, totally. But I thought I would just, so folks are, I suppose folks are probably curious what they shouldn't definitely say. Is there some stuff that folks just like, never say that's pretty wide spread? Do people not like handicapped folks? That seems kind of antiquated.
Yeah, I would avoid handicap for sure. That's the one I think I hear the most often that people use, thinking that they're being polite, especially if you're talking about like a stall or a parking spot. Like, it's an accessible parking spot and it's an accessible stall, right? That is a great word to insert in there if you're not sure what to say. Accessible, disabled, disability, all great words. I think that there's probably a good amount that yeah, I'll leave it at that. I think I've got an entire presentation on this. I'd be happy to come back and give a presentation on language.
Yeah,
then we can spend a long time talking about that.
But it is, I think, really important that there's representation in Olympia that really really knows these issues as well, and that folks can educate their fellow lawmakers and staff. So,
just recently, I think it was 2, maybe 3 years ago, we finally rewrote the statutes to not use derogatory terms about folks with disabilities. Just 3 years ago, that finally came up, and that was something I think it was Kilduff, and it's been a couple years since Kilduff was a legislator, right? I think that's one of the last things she did, just 3 years ago. Really, really horrible derogatory language was on the book, so we've got a lot of work to do. And the language we use really reflects a lot about what we think about folks and whether or not we treat individuals as second-class citizens or not.
It's really important. Well, unless someone wants to try to shoot a question in the chat really quick, I can kind of go to our wrap-up question, which as candidates maybe got pretty familiar with during the course of endorsement interviews. I figured it's a good last question, which is because I know I hope a lot of folks are heeding the urbanist endorsements, but maybe some people are still on the fence. But the endorsement, the elections committee was really convinced that Darya is the strongest candidate. Oh, we did get a question. So before I do this, can you speak at all to how you would advocate for constituents who are elder renters in this district? It's the fastest growing demographic.
Yeah, I guess I would say I would want to advocate with, not for. You know, I've heard a couple different times in this race and leading up to the primary as well, you know, like, oh, you want to be a voice for the voiceless? That is absolutely not what I want. I want to pass the mic. I want to bring people in. And that work, I mean, to be able to do that successfully, that means you have to already have relationships in the community. That means you already have to know who to go to, so that in the heat of session, when things are happening, right, you're not trying to build a brand new relationship. And, you know, I will be honest and say that that's a community I need to do more community building and relationship building within. So I'm not sure who's asking that question, but if you've got ideas on people I should be connecting with, I would love to hear those. I would love to meet with those communities and figure out what your priorities are and what you would like to see happen, so that I can get there and do that more confidently. Because right now I don't feel super confident in that, and I'm perfectly happy to be transparent about that.
Totally, I can connect you with that person, or feel free to
Right.
reach out in the chat or on the website.
Yeah. I'll
Let's
drop my
see.
email in here.
Oh yeah, thank you. So pivoting back to my little final question, how would you what would you say is the biggest contrast with your opponent? What sort of distinguishes you?
Yeah, I think there are a couple different things that distinguish me. I would say first, and I think foremost, are our priorities. My priority is the intersection of behavioral health, housing and homelessness, and the criminal legal system. And that's because, as I mentioned earlier, I think we've been working in silos in each one of those, in each one of those areas. And it's not doing us any favors. The reality is that folks who are going to experience behavioral health crisis and homelessness are going to come in contact with our criminal legal system. So we have to build our systems and programs with that understanding, and specifically with the understanding that we have been using the criminal legal system to plug the holes in our social services system, which doesn't make any sense and is backwards. And I want us to be intervening earlier, sooner, instead of waiting for folks to come into contact with these systems and then maybe possibly get the help that they need. I think that that is a very big difference between my opponent and I. I think my what am I trying to say? Work experience is also it's different, and I think that it's more relevant. Working as public policy director, I know what the legislature looks like, and I can really truly hit the ground running because my job relies on me successfully being able to navigate the legislature already. I do think it's important that we have folks there who can hit the ground running, because we've got huge issues to tackle, not just the issues that are specific to Washington, but we've got a bunch of other issues coming from the federal government, from the Supreme Court right now, that are going to take some really hard conversations and are going to take some real political savviness, which is something that I have a lot of. You know, working in the legislature, what you see is about 10-15% of what's actually happening. The showing up and testifying, the meeting with legislators is very, very important. But where the bulk of the work is happening is behind the scenes. And that's where I excel, right? It's in those different strategy conversations. It's in those tough negotiating rooms. That is the bulk of the work of being a legislator. And I can really get there and get it done. And I can do it in a way that centers the voices of folks with direct lived experience who have not been heard. Talking about doing that and then actually doing that in the legislature are two very, very different things. It is not easy to force an institution, that's what it is, right? It is not easy to force an institution to shift their culture and the way that they've been doing things. And I have been doing that already. I've been doing that on the outside, working with folks who are on the inside. And while I know doing it from the inside is going to be very different, but you'll have more access to tools and resources. And you want to be able to do it in a way that still promotes dignity and empowerment for those individuals who are telling their stories. And that doesn't always happen. And there needs to be true accountability that comes with that. I operate as an organizer because those are my roots. I started as an organizer, and that's the kind of legislator I want to be, right? Is somebody who works in a co-governance model, not somebody who sits in an ivory tower. I'll be very brief. I know I'm rambling. The other piece I mentioned was I'd be the first Middle Eastern woman ever elected, right? Not only that, but I'd actually be the youngest person to ever represent this district. Those are two really important demographics that don't have their voice heard in Olympia. And that is part of why I am so committed to this value of lifting every voice and co-governance. And I think we need more of that there. Now I will end by saying, the folks who are supporting me are also different. I am really, really proud to have received the support of all three of the former primary candidates. That is not an easy thing to do. And I think it really speaks to my organizing skills, to my bridge building, my relationship building skills, is to bring in folks who I was competing against, right? And still be able to have them support me. And not just in name, have them actually showing up to support me, hosting fundraisers for me. You'll see them in my campaign videos, right? Showing up to speak in support of me at our legislative meetings. That's the kind of coalition builder that I am, right? It doesn't matter if we are folks with different ideas on different issues. It's about trying to figure out what's in the middle. And actually, I think I've proven that I can do that through even just that. I'm also really proud, as of relatively recently, we've gotten the sole endorsements of Planned Parenthood and Pro-Choice Washington. So we're the only candidate endorsed by reproductive rights organizations in this race. Also the only candidate endorsed by children's organizations, transportation organizations, environmental organizations, you name it. I'm really, really proud of our growing endorsement list. And I'm really proud that we won the primary, and I know that we can do it again. And I hope that we can do it with all of your support.
Awesome. I love it when a candidate gets a contrast question. It doesn't just give a 30-second non-answer. I want to hear the contrast. I know it's a really tough thing to do. I know there's a reason why you're doing it. So let us have it. And you did that. So appreciate that. Definitely check out the website, Darya, DARYA for House. And she shared her campaign email in there. It's info@daryaforhouse.com if anyone wants to reach out to either volunteer or just with questions. We really encourage folks to get engaged, whether that's just talking to your friends about the race. That's how campaigns are won. So thanks so much for your time, Darya, and best of luck. It's getting to be crunch time, and I know you're campaigning your butt off.
Yes, thank you all so much. Thank you for your thoughtful questions. I appreciate the chance to talk with all of you. And I hope we get to talk again soon.